Have you ever felt invisible? There's a dangerous belief in our world that your title defines your worth, that your position dictates your power. We're told to climb the ladder, to be loud, to be seen. But what if I told you that the most powerful person in the room is often the one nobody notices? What if true worth has nothing to do with the corner office and everything to do with character? This story shatters that illusion in the most spectacular way imaginable. We're about to dive into the world of two people living on opposite ends of the power spectrum: Roy Bowman, a ruthless CEO who believes he's a god, and Amy Reynolds, his quiet, brilliant assistant who he sees as less than nothing. Get this, the story explodes when Roy screams "You're worthless" before firing her in front of the entire company. It's a brutal, humiliating moment. But the universe has a funny way of balancing the scales, because just 24 hours later, she walks back into that same company as the new majority shareholder. This isn't just a story about a shocking plot twist, it's a raw, emotional journey that questions everything we think we know about success and failure. It's about a man blinded by his own reflection and a woman whose quiet kindness was mistaken for weakness. We're going to explore the secret she was protecting, the incredible destiny she was unknowingly moving towards, and the moment of redemption that no one saw coming. This is the ultimate story of overcoming, proving that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply letting your true value shine. Before we witness this incredible story unfold, I really want to feel the energy of our amazing community. Please drop a comment below and let us know what beautiful city or town you're watching from right now. We love to see just how far our stories have reached. And if this story already resonates with you, do us a huge favor, hit that like button. Make sure you follow the channel so you don't miss a single moment, and please share this video with at least one person who you think will be touched by this powerful message. It's a funny thing, power. It can feel like a warm coat on a cold day, but sometimes it just makes the wearer blind to the blizzard swirling right around them. For Roy Bowman, the high-flying CEO of the firm, power wasn't just a coat, it was his entire skin. He walked the halls not like a leader, but like a man who owned the very air everyone else breathed. This was his kingdom, and everyone else? Well, they were just part of the scenery. It's a lonely, cold way to live, even if you don't know it yet. That Tuesday morning felt different, charged with a heavy, static energy. The air crackled, you know. Roy Bowman was storming through the office, his face a mask of pure thunder, desperately looking for a target to absorb the blast of his own mistake. He found it, as he so often did, in the quietest person in the room. Amy Reynolds, his assistant, who was the silent, steady engine keeping his chaotic professional world from spinning completely off its axis. He didn't see her work, he only saw an easy scapegoat for the emotional turmoil he created. "You," he roared, pointing a finger that shook with a manufactured rage. The entire open-plan office froze solid. This wasn't just a dressing down, this, my friend, was a performance. Roy, the almighty CEO, needed an audience for his cruel bit of theater. He stalked towards her desk, his voice dripping with contempt, ensuring every single shareholder, at least every potential one visiting the floor, could hear him assert his absolute dominance. He was about to make Amy humiliated in a way that felt almost criminal. "If had it, you're incompetent. Do you have any idea what you cost me?" Amy Reynolds stood up, her face pale but her eyes strikingly clear, trying to speak. But Roy Bowman wasn't interested in explanations or facts. He was interested in sacrifice. "You're worthless," he screamed, the horrible word echoing off the expensive glass walls. "Utterly worthless. Get your things. You're fired." The silence that followed was somehow heavier and louder than the scream itself, a vacuum of shared shock and secondhand shame. She didn't cry. Not right then. That perhaps was the biggest surprise for the onlookers. She simply nodded, a quiet, unbreakable dignity settling over her as the humiliated staff watched, frozen. It was an emotional atom bomb, and she was standing right at ground zero. Roy Bowman scoffed, seeing her composure as weakness, a final confirmation that she was indeed nothing to him. He turned, satisfied with his display, already forgetting her name. He had no idea what destiny had just been set in motion. As Roy swaggered back to his glass-walled office, he felt that cheap, hollow thrill of a battle won. He didn't know, couldn't possibly know, that this act wasn't an ending. It was the pulling of a trigger on a complex machine he didn't even know existed. He had just fired the one person who knew his every move, the one person who constantly fixed his messes before they exploded. He had discarded the keeper of his most damaging secret, and he had absolutely no clue just how brilliant his worthless assistant truly was. You see, Amy Reynolds was the silent architect of Roy Bowman's success. She was the one who remembered the name of a crucial client's daughter, the one who caught the typo that would have cost them millions, the one who rescheduled his impossible meetings into something that resembled a coherent day. Her job description said assistant, but in reality, she was a chaos manager, a ghostwriter, and a professional miracle worker, all rolled into one. Her brilliance wasn't loud, it was a quiet, steady hum beneath the roar of the CEO's engine. Her defining feature, however, wasn't her intellect, but her profound sense of kindness. She was the type of person who knew the names of the cleaning crew, who always had a spare granola bar for the intern who forgot lunch, who watered the sad-looking office plant that everyone else ignored. This wasn't a strategy, it was just who she was. This deep well of empathy was a secret strength in a world that often mistook compassion for weakness, a mistake Roy Bowman would make time and time again. More often than not, she was the designated shock absorber for his explosive temper. When Roy made a promise he couldn't keep or an impulsive decision that backfired, it was Amy who took the fall. She'd quietly accept the blame, weathering the emotional storm with a resilience that baffled those who witnessed it. This wasn't weakness, it was a strategic choice. She understood that for the company to succeed, the CEO needed to appear infallible, and she was willing to sacrifice her own recognition for the greater good. She managed his life with the precision of a Swiss watch, a silent dance of overcoming one self-made disaster after another. She knew he preferred his coffee black before 10 a.m. and with a splash of cream after. She knew which shareholder needed a gentle reminder and which one needed a firm deadline. Amy Reynolds held the intricate, unwritten rulebook to Roy Bowman's entire existence, a responsibility that would have crushed a lesser person. But for Amy, it was simply Tuesday. In her heart, she held onto a quiet belief in redemption. Perhaps, she thought, if she worked hard enough, if she showed enough loyalty, he would eventually see her value. It was a faint hope, a flickering candle in the hurricane of his ego. This hope was a deeply personal secret, the fuel that kept her going through the long nights and the thankless days. She saw a flicker of potential in him, a man who could be better if he just let himself be. But Roy was a man who only saw what was in the mirror. He never once noticed that the documents he presented flawlessly were the product of her sleepless nights. He never considered that the calm in his professional life was a gift she gave him every single day. He was a king who never bothered to learn the name of the person polishing his crown, utterly oblivious to the fact that his worthless assistant was the only thing holding his fragile kingdom together. For Roy Bowman, employees were like pens. Some worked well for a while, but when they ran out of ink or started to smudge, you just tossed them out and got a new one. It was a cold, but in his mind, efficient way to run a business. Amy Reynolds to him was just a pen. A very reliable one, sure, but ultimately disposable. The idea that she might possess an intellect rivaling or even surpassing his own, well, that was simply laughable. It never even crossed the man's mind. His ego was a fortress, you see, with walls so high and thick that no outside perspective could ever penetrate it. From his vantage point, he was the sun, and everyone else were just tiny planets orbiting him. He saw Amy's quiet efficiency not as a sign of brilliance, but as a sign of a subordinate who knew her place. In his world, true power was loud, arrogant, and disruptive. The things he was. Her silence was just the absence of ambition, the confirmation that she was worthless beyond her tasks. What he failed to grasp was the nature of the powerful secret she protected. It wasn't just about his professional blunders or his personal indiscretions. It was something far deeper, a connection to the very soul of the company he now led. This secret was Amy's armor, a silent promise she had made long before Roy Bowman ever became CEO. She was a guardian of a legacy he was too arrogant to understand, a legacy he was actively dismantling with his careless greed. He moved through his days with the confidence of a man who believes he is the sole architect of his own destiny. He never once stopped to think that the perfectly placed folder on his desk, the one that saved him from being humiliated in a board meeting, was an act of foresight from Amy. He just assumed it was where it was supposed to be, a product of the natural order of his universe. The universe, of course, being himself. His blindness wasn't just professional, it was personal. He never noticed the way her eyes would light up when discussing complex market strategies, or the subtle way she'd guide conversations to more productive outcomes. He saw a mouse, not a lioness in quiet repose. This profound underestimation was the fatal flaw in his character, the crack in his armor. He was a CEO who couldn't see the most valuable asset in his entire company, even though she sat just outside his door. And so he continued to treat her like a piece of furniture, a functional object devoid of thoughts, feelings, or most important, liper. He had no idea that the disposable employee he barely noticed was holding a thread connected to his entire future. A thread he was about to carelessly and catastrophically snap with his own two hands. One evening, while staying late to finalize a report he needed, Amy overheard it. Roy Bowman was on a personal call, his voice booming with the casual cruelty of the privileged. He was laughing with one of his wealthy friends, describing her as some girl from the sticks who probably thinks fine dining is a clean fork. Each word was a small, sharp icicle to the heart. In that moment, she felt utterly humiliated, not by a public scream, but by a private, dismissive chuckle that confirmed she was nothing more than a punchline to him. The emotional weight of it was crushing. She could have quit right then and there. She could have let his next big project, a make-or-break deal with a new shareholder, go down in flames. No one would have blamed her. The desire for revenge, however small, was a tempting whisper in the back of her mind. But that wasn't Amy Reynolds. The hurt was real, a deep, aching wound, but her character, her profound sense of duty, was stronger. Later that week, the big deal was on the verge of collapse. Roy, for all his bluster, couldn't see the solution. He was pacing his office like a caged animal, the mighty CEO on the brink of a massive failure. Amy, from her desk, saw the flaw in his strategy. She saw the simple, elegant move that would not only save the deal, but make it far more profitable. The answer was so clear to her, a beacon in the fog of his panic. She was in the process of overcoming the personal pain had caused her. She typed out the core of the idea into a single, concise paragraph. There was no name, no signature, no hint of its origin. She sent it from a generic, anonymous internal messaging account, a ghost in the machine. It was an act of pure kindness, a quiet rebellion against his cruelty. She chose to be better than him. She wouldn't let the company, or the jobs of the people who worked there, suffer because of one man's ignorant arrogance. It was a secret act of grace. The message landed in Roy's inbox like a lifeline from an unknown god. He read it once, then twice. His panic subsided, replaced by a jolt of electrified excitement. The idea was perfect. It was brilliant. It was, he immediately concluded, something he must have subconsciously thought of himself. The notion that it came from someone he considered inferior was an impossibility his ego would never allow. Amy watched him from her desk as the realization dawned on his face. She saw the relief, the dawning greed as he prepared to claim the idea as his own. There was no satisfaction for her, only a quiet, bittersweet resolve. She had saved him from himself, and he would never even know it. This anonymous suggestion was a test, and she already knew he was going to fail it spectacularly. Just as she predicted, Roy Bowman presented the idea at the board meeting as if it were a masterpiece he had painstakingly crafted himself. He stood before the board, a conquering hero, his voice resonating with confidence and vision. As I envisioned it, he began, laying out the strategy point by point without a single flicker of hesitation. The board was captivated. The deal was saved. The CEO had once again proven his genius, and he soaked in the applause like a dry sponge in a downpour. He felt an intoxicating rush of power, a confirmation of everything he believed about himself. This success was just another piece of evidence that he was a titan of industry, a man whose instincts were flawless. He made a point to be particularly dismissive to Amy later that day, as if to subconsciously remind himself of the natural order. His success was his own people like her, people he deemed worthless, were merely there to witness it. This was his narrative, and he would stick to it. Yet, something was off. In the quiet moments, when the applause faded and he was alone in his sprawling office, a strange thought pricked at the edge of his consciousness. Where had that idea come from? He knew, deep down, in a place he refused to look, that it hadn't been his. It had appeared too perfectly, too fully formed. This tiny, nagging curiosity was a splinter in his mind, a dissonance he couldn't quite resolve. It was an unexpected surprise to his own ego. This was a plot twist in his own internal monologue. He, Roy Bowman, had always been the source of every great idea. To admit, even to himself, that this one came from outside was to admit a weakness, a chink in his armor. So he pushed the thought down, burying it under layers of arrogance and self-congratulation. But it lingered, a persistent ghost in the back of his mind, a question mark he refused to acknowledge. He began to watch his team more closely, but with the wrong kind of eyes. He wasn't looking for a collaborator, he was looking for a threat. Who on his team was smart enough to come up with that? He scanned the faces of his top executives, his most trusted advisors, with a newfound suspicion. The thought that the idea could have come from his quiet, unassuming assistant was so far outside the realm of possibility that it never, not for a single second, occurred to him. And so, the secret of the anonymous message remained safe, locked away behind the impenetrable wall of his own vanity. He had been given a lifeline, and instead of being grateful, he was merely annoyed by the mystery of its origin. He was a man who had just been saved from drowning and was now complaining about the water being wet, completely unaware of the identity of his silent savior. A few weeks later, Roy was in the security office, reviewing footage for a minor incident involving a misplaced delivery. As he idly clicked through the camera feeds, he landed on one showing the employee break room. There she was, Amy Reynolds, talking to the elderly janitor, a man named George who was usually invisible to the executive staff. Roy watched, intrigued by this strange little scene. What could his assistant possibly have to say to a janitor? He saw Amy reach into her purse and pull out her own wallet. She handed several bills to George, who looked surprised and then immensely grateful. A moment later, she returned with a tray of hot food from the cafeteria and sat with him while he ate, not speaking much, just offering her quiet company. Roy stared at the screen, a smirk of contempt playing on his lips. This was, in his eyes, definitive proof of her nature. This was what made people like her worthless in his world. To Roy, this display of kindness was nothing more than a profound weakness. In his cutthroat world, you didn't help the struggling, you climbed over them to get to the top. Compassion was a liability, an emotional dead weight that slowed you down. He saw her gesture not as an act of generosity, but as a foolish waste of time and money on someone who, in his view, was at the bottom of the food chain for a reason. Her destiny was to serve, George's was to clean. He zoomed in on her face on the monitor. She was smiling, a genuine, warm expression that made him vaguely uncomfortable. It was a look of contentment that he, with all his money and power, rarely felt himself. This irritated him. Why would someone find satisfaction in such a pointless act? He concluded it was the simple, naive nature of a person who just didn't understand how the world really worked. A person who would never, ever be a real player. This tiny, observed moment solidified his entire perception of her. She wasn't just an assistant, she was the embodiment of everything he disdained: soft, emotional, and inefficient. He, the great CEO, was a creature of logic and ambition. He made deals that shaped the future of the company. She bought lunch for the janitor. The gap between them was, in his mind, the gap between a god and a peasant. It was a destiny he believed was set in stone. He clicked off the monitor, the image of her simple act of charity leaving a sour taste in his mouth. He completely missed the secret strength hidden in that very act. He saw weakness where there was integrity, and naivety where there was profound character. He was a man looking at a gold nugget and dismissing it as a worthless rock, simply because he was too blind to see its shine. The day of the quarterly board meeting arrived like a ticking time bomb. This wasn't just any meeting, it was the one where Roy Bowman had to justify his aggressive expansion strategy. Everything hinged on a single presentation file, a complex digital document containing months of data, projections, and sensitive financial models. It was his magnum opus, the key to securing his legacy and quieting the whispers of doubt from a few skeptical board members. The pressure was immense. Then, the unthinkable happened. An hour before the meeting, a junior executive, clumsy and nervous, accidentally deleted the file from the central server while trying to make a minor update. Not just deleted, wiped, gone. Panic ripped through the executive suite like a fire. Roy's face went from tanned and confident to a ghastly pale white. This was a catastrophe, a complete and utter disaster. He was facing total public humiliation. Without a moment's hesitation, without even asking what had happened, Roy Bowman's mind did what it always did: it found a scapegoat. His eyes, wild with panic and rage, scanned the floor and landed on Amy Reynolds. "You," he bellowed, his voice cracking. "This was your responsibility. You were supposed to have the backup. What did you do?" It was a baseless, reflexive accusation, born not of logic, but of pure, unadulterated fear. Amy, who had been in the middle of printing the meeting agendas, was stunned. She had nothing to do with the file's management, but she knew better than to argue with him in this state. The emotional hurricane was in full force, and she was standing directly in its path. "Roy, I can try to help," she started, but he cut her off. The mighty CEO was terrified, and his terror was curdling into a vicious, ugly rage that needed a target. He needed someone to blame, someone to sacrifice to the board when he inevitably had to admit failure. Pointing the finger at a senior executive was complicated, blaming his assistant was easy. It was clean. In his mind, she was already on the path to being fired. He could build a narrative of her incompetence, her failure. He could paint himself as the victim of a worthless employee's critical mistake. He continued to berate her, his voice rising, his accusations growing more frantic. He was creating a smokescreen of fury to hide his own terror. He didn't see a loyal employee, he saw a shield. He saw a convenient explanation for his impending doom. He had no idea that the very person he was verbally crucifying was the only one in the entire building who might have a chance to pull him out of the fire. While Roy Bowman was busy rehearsing his speech of blame and excuses, Amy Reynolds slipped away from the storm. She didn't waste time on anger or self-pity. She went straight to the IT department, her mind already working, calculating, and strategizing. The tech team was grim, The file wasn't just deleted, it was overwritten. They said recovery was impossible. Oh, 9 shot. For Amy, that was the only shot she needed. It was a moment of true overcoming. She spent the entire night in the server room, a place few executives had ever seen. With the help of a junior IT tech who was in awe of her calm authority, she began a painstaking deep dive recovery. It was a digital archaeological dig, sifting through fragments of data and corrupted code. Hour after hour, fueled by nothing but black coffee and a fierce, quiet determination, she worked. This was her secret world where her true intellect could finally be unleashed. Around 3 a.m., she found it. A ghost of the file, a corrupted, barrel-leather fragment. She didn't just recover it, she rebuilt it from the ground up. And as she pieced the data back together, she saw the flaws in Roy's original strategy. They were subtle, but they were their risky assumptions, overlooked market trends. Her mind, free from the constraints of his ego, saw a better way. A smarter, safer, and far more profitable path forward. She didn't just restore the presentation, she transformed it. She recalibrated the financial models, added contingency plans had never considered, and strengthened the core argument with new, compelling data. It was no longer just his project, it was a masterpiece of strategic thinking. This was an act of profound kindness, not to Roy, but to the company and the hundreds of employees whose jobs were on the line. This was her destiny in action. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the empty office, she saved the final version. It was perfect. She had not only averted a disaster that would have cost the shareholders dearly, but she had turned a potential failure into a guaranteed triumph. She had single-handedly saved the company from a major financial disaster and the CEO from the ultimate humiliation, and no one would ever know the lengths she had gone to. She placed the new file in a secure folder, sent a simple, anonymous notification that the issue was resolved, and went back to her desk. She looked exhausted but calm. The emotional battle of the night was won, not with shouting or anger, but with quiet competence and a will of iron. She had performed a miracle, and she knew, with a sad certainty, that she would receive no thanks for it. The next morning, Roy Bowman strode into the office, his panic replaced by a renewed, swaggering arrogance. He had seen the notification that the file was restored, and in his mind, this was not a miracle performed by Amy, but the natural order of things reasserting itself. The system had fixed itself, or the IT department had finally done their job. The thought that Amy could be responsible was simply not in his vocabulary. He was ready for his victory. But first, he needed to finish the performance from the day before. He needed to put the incompetent employee in her place. He saw Amy at her desk, looking tired, and marched over, ready to deliver his final crushing blow. He was completely oblivious to the fact that he was about to attack the very person who had spent all night saving his career. This was the tragic, final act of his blindness, a moment that would seal his fate. "Don't think because the file is back that you're off the hook," he snarled, his voice low and menacing for all to hear. "Your incompetence put this entire company at risk. The emotional stress you caused yesterday is unforgivable." Amy looked up at him, the exhaustion on her face hardening into a calm, steely resolve. For the first time, she didn't just absorb his anger. She met his gaze, and she didn't flinch. This was a plot twist he never saw coming. This quiet defiance was all it took to make him snap. His fear from the day before, which had been simmering just below the surface, boiled over into pure rage. He couldn't stand that she wasn't cowering. He needed to make her feel worthless to feel powerful himself. The stage was set for the final explosive confrontation, the one that had been building for years. The desire for this cruel form of revenge on his perceived source of stress was overwhelming. "I have had it," he roared, pointing that trembling finger at her again. "You're incompetent. Do you have any idea what you cost me?" The words from his nightmare were now a waking reality. "You're worthless. He screamed, the word echoing with a terrible finality. Utterly worthless. Get your things. You're fired. The entire office watched, humiliated on her behalf, as the CEO committed the biggest mistake of his entire life, and he did it with a triumphant smile. He had just fired his savior. He had berated and cast out the one person who had single-handedly transformed his imminent, catastrophic failure into what would be his greatest success. He felt a surge of victory, of order being restored. He had no idea that he hadn't restored order at all. He had just detonated a bomb right under his own throne, and the fallout was coming far sooner than he could ever imagine. In the deafening silence that followed Roy's outburst, Amy Reynolds did not crumble. While she was undoubtedly humiliated, a profound sense of calm washed over her. It was the strange, quiet peace that comes after the worst part of the storm has passed. She slowly, methodically, began to pack her personal belongings into a small cardboard box. Each item, a pen, a notebook, a small desk plant was placed with deliberate care. Her movements were graceful, dignified, an act of quiet rebellion in itself. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. She could feel the mixture of pity and fear radiating from her colleagues. They were sorry for her, but they were also terrified for themselves. Her ordeal was a warning to them all. This was the culture Roy had built, a kingdom of fear where loyalty was a one-way street. But Amy wasn't fueled by fear anymore. This was a moment of painful but necessary overcoming. As she cleared her desk, she felt a strange sense of liberation. The weight of his secrets, his tempers, his Cosette was all lifting. The end of this chapter of her life felt less like a tragedy and more like a destiny finally being fulfilled. She was leaving behind the thankless job of being his shield. The emotional labor was over. Her quiet suffering in this toxic environment was finally coming to an end. When the box was full, only 2 items remained on the polished surface of the desk: her set of office keys and a small, worn-out photograph in a simple frame. She picked up the photo, her fingers tracing the faded image for a brief, poignant moment. A flicker of something's sadness, resolve, perhaps even a hint of a coming revenge crossed her face. It was a picture most people would overlook, yet it held the biggest secret of them all. She placed the keys neatly on the desk and, with a final, deliberate action, laid the small photograph face down beside them. She didn't leave a note. She didn't make a scene. Her silent departure was more powerful than any angry words could ever be. It was an act pregnant with meaning, a quiet statement that the game had changed. This wasn't just an ending, it felt like the beginning of a mysterious love story, or perhaps the end of one. With her box in her arms, Amy Reynolds walked out of the office for the last time. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had left behind the only 2 things that mattered: the keys to the kingdom and the clue that would eventually explain how she was about to take the throne. The quietest person in the room had just made the loudest move of all. Roy Bowman felt a smug sense of satisfaction as he watched Amy leave. He had excised the problem, reasserted his authority. He walked into the triumphant board meeting, used the flawless presentation she had secretly perfected, and received a standing ovation. For a few glorious hours, the CEO was on top of the world, convinced he had made the right decision. He had cut away the dead weight, the worthless part of his operation. The real world, however, was about to send him the bill for his arrogance. The chaos began subtly. First, he missed a call with a crucial investor because a meeting had been double-booked. Then, he couldn't find the briefing notes for his afternoon conference, notes Amy would have had printed and highlighted on his desk. He realized with a jolt that he didn't know the password to his own travel account to book a flight for the next day. Small things, but the cracks were starting to show. The well-oiled machine of his life had begun to sputter and stall. By late afternoon, the chaos was a raging fire. His schedule, once a perfectly arranged work of art, was a disaster zone of conflicting appointments and missed deadlines. He barked orders at other assistants, but they didn't know his cryptic shorthand. They didn't know that the usual meant a specific coffee order, or that the Henderson file was a project he had secretly renamed. The invisible language he and Amy had shared was gone, and he was lost in translation. The panic began to set in, a cold, creeping dread. It was an emotional realization that was both infuriating and terrifying. Her value wasn't in the tasks she did, it was in the disasters she prevented. She wasn't just an assistant, she was the operating system for his entire professional life, and he had just uninstalled it. The surprise of his own incompetence was a bitter pill to swallow. He, the great Roy Bowman, couldn't even manage his own day. He thought back to the moment he had fired her, his public display of power. It now seemed like an act of catastrophic self-sabotage. For the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced his ego. Had he made a mistake? The thought was so foreign, so unwelcome, that he immediately tried to squash it. But it was too late. The evidence was all around him, in the flashing missed call alerts and the pile of unorganized papers on his desk. He sat in his magnificent office, a king in a kingdom that was rapidly falling apart, all because he had banished the one person who knew how it all worked. The silence from her empty desk outside his door was no longer a sign of his power, but a screaming testament to his foolishness. And the day was far from over. The real crisis hadn't even begun yet. Just as Roy was drowning in his own administrative chaos, a new, far more terrifying storm broke. An emergency notification flashed across every screen in the company. A press release had been issued. A single mysterious investor, operating through a private equity firm nobody had ever heard of, had quietly been buying up shares. And just moments ago, they had acquired a massive block of stock, giving them a controlling stake. The company was officially the subject of a hostile takeover. Panic erupted. The open plan office, which had been silent with fear just hours before, was now buzzing with frantic, terrified energy. Phones rang off the hook. People were huddled in corners, whispering. The stock price was plummeting in after-hours trading. This wasn't just a problem, it was an extinction-level event. The company, as they knew it, was on the verge of being dismantled or sold for parts. This was the ultimate plot twist. Roy Bowman felt the blood drain from his face. This couldn't be happening. He was the CEO, he was supposed to be in control. He scrambled to get his top advisors on the line, but the information was scarce. The buyer was anonymous, a ghost. They had moved with surgical precision, exploiting a loophole in reporting requirements that allowed them to amass shares without triggering an early warning. It was a brilliant, ruthless move. It felt personal. It felt like revenge. The word shareholder now held a terrifying new meaning. It was no longer a group of people he could charm and manipulate. It was a single faceless entity that now owned him. His throne was, in an instant, rendered powerless. The surprise was so profound, so complete, that he felt a wave of dizziness. Who could have done this? Who had the resources, the cunning, and the motive to launch such a devastating attack? He desperately tried to project an image of calm, calling for an emergency board meeting for the following morning. But inside, his carefully constructed world was shattering into a million pieces. This was a corporate nightmare made real. The timing was too perfect, too cruel. On the very day he had asserted his absolute power by firing his assistant, a far greater power had emerged from the shadows to usurp him entirely. As the panic swirled around him, his mind raced, trying to connect the dots. This couldn't be a coincidence. The chaos of his schedule, the public firing, and now this. It felt like a perfectly orchestrated attack, designed not just to take over the company, but to maximize his personal humiliation. A dark secret was at play, and he was the last one to know about it. In the midst of the corporate meltdown, Roy found himself pacing back and forth, his mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. His gaze fell upon the empty desk outside his office, the scene of his earlier foolish triumph. And then he saw it. The small, worn-out photograph lying face down, exactly where Amy Reynolds had left it. In his haste and arrogance, he hadn't even bothered to look at it. Now it seemed like the only tangible object in a world that had gone mad. He walked over and picked it up, his hand trembling slightly. He turned it over. The image was faded, a relic from a different era. It showed a much younger Amy, smiling, standing beside an older man with kind eyes and a familiar face he couldn't quite place. They were standing in front of the company's original, much smaller headquarters. There was an easy, genuine affection between them, like a granddaughter and her beloved grandfather. It felt like a scene from a forgotten love story. He stared at the old man's face, a jolt of recognition slowly dawning. He had seen that face before, in oil paintings in the lobby and in old company archives. The kind, smiling man was Arthur Wembley, the company's brilliant, reclusive, and long-retired founder. The man was a legend, a myth. He had vanished from public life decades ago, and no one had heard from him since. This was the biggest surprise of his life. Suddenly, the pieces started clicking into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and unbelievable. The secret Amy had been protecting wasn't his. It was hers. This photograph wasn't a sentimental keepsake, it was a statement. It was a clue to a puzzle he was only now beginning to comprehend. The quiet, worthless assistant he had fired had a direct connection to the very soul of the company. This was the plot twist to end all plot twists. His entire perception of her place in the world, was a lie. She wasn't some girl from the sticks. She was something else entirely. Something powerful. The photograph felt heavy in his hand, like an artifact that had rewritten history. His destiny and hers were more intertwined than he could ever have imagined, and he had just played his part in her story perfectly. The anonymous suggestion, her quiet dignity, her mysterious composure all started to make a terrifying kind of sense. The CEO stared at the image of the founder smiling at Amy, and for the first time, he felt true, unadulterated fear. The hostile takeover was no longer a mystery. The faceless investor was starting to have a face, and it was a face he had humiliated in front of his entire company just hours ago. As Roy's mind struggled to process the impossible photograph, the final, devastating piece of the puzzle was clicking into place across town. The anonymous investor was preparing for their grand entrance. And the truth was more theatrical and ingenious than anyone could have guessed. The elderly janitor, George, the man Amy had shown such simple, genuine kindness to, was not a janitor at all. He was Arthur Wembley, the founder, in disguise. For the past year, Arthur had been walking the halls of his own company, a ghost in plain sight. He was old, he was tired, and he was looking for a successor. But he wasn't looking for another ruthless corporate shark like Roy Bowman. He was searching for someone with character, integrity, and a respect for the people who formed the company's backbone. He had created a secret test, a real-world audition for the soul of his legacy. He had watched Roy Bowman, the celebrated CEO, treat the cleaning staff like they were invisible. He had seen the culture of fear Roy cultivated, the arrogance that dripped from his every word. Roy had failed the test spectacularly from day one. Then Arthur watched Amy. He saw her work ethic, her quiet brilliance, and most importantly, her heart. He saw her defend colleagues, fix mistakes that weren't hers, and show respect to everyone, regardless of their title. Her act of buying him a meal wasn't just a nice gesture, it was the final confirmation. It was the moment Arthur knew he had found his successor. Her compassion, which Roy had dismissed as a weakness, was, in Arthur's eyes, the most critical strength a leader could possess. This was the surprise he had been searching for. The true heir to his empire wasn't in the boardroom, she was managing the chaos right outside of it. The plan was set in motion. The destiny he envisioned for his company was finally within reach. He had witnessed firsthand how Roy humiliated and underestimated her, confirming that the man was a liability to the company's future. The entire hostile takeover was Arthur's design, a brilliant plot twist engineered to remove the cancer of arrogance and install a leader with a soul. He wasn't just looking for a new shareholder, he was looking for a guardian. And he found one in the most unexpected of places. The janitor, the founder, the mentorate was all the same man, playing a role to find the one person who was worthy. The quiet kindness Amy had shown to a struggling old man was about to be repaid a billionfold. The relationship between Amy and George the janitor had deepened over the months. It was more than just friendly chats in the break room. Arthur Wembley, in his disguise, had become her secret mentor. He would ask her probing questions about the company's strategy, listening intently to her insightful, often brilliant answers. He saw in her a strategic mind that Roy Bowman was too blind to ever appreciate. It was a secret tutelage, a master passing his wisdom to a worthy apprentice. He pushed her, challenged her, and gave her complex business problems disguised as hypothetical questions. And every single time, she impressed him with her intelligence and her ethical compass. He was preparing her for the throne, long before she ever knew a throne existed. This period of overcoming her own self-doubt, fueled by his encouragement, was transformative. She started to see her own worth, a worth that had nothing to do with her job title. The day Roy fired her was the final signal Arthur needed. He had witnessed the entire brutal event through the eyes of the janitor, feeling a quiet fury at the injustice. That act of cruelty was the catalyst. It was time to execute the final phase of his plan. It was time for redemption, not for Roy, but for the company itself. The time for secrets was almost over. That evening, after Amy had left the office for the last time, she met with Arthur. It was then that he finally revealed his true identity. The surprise left her speechless. The kind old janitor she had befriended was the legendary founder of the company. He explained everything: his search, his test, his belief in her. He told her that he wasn't offering her a job, he was offering her a destiny. He presented her with the legal documents, already signed and executed. He had officially transferred his entire block of majority shares into her name. She, Amy Reynolds, the assistant who had just been told she was worthless, was now the most powerful shareholder in the company. The transfer was her reward for her kindness, her integrity, and her quiet strength. It was the ultimate revenge against a system that had cast her aside. She was no longer just Amy. She was the woman who held the company's future in her hands. Arthur had given her more than just stock. He had given her the power to reshape the company in her own image, to build a culture of respect and compassion. The stage was now set for the most dramatic emergency board meeting in the company's history. The next morning, the boardroom was a chamber of dread. The executives, including a pale and shaken Roy Bowman, sat waiting for the mysterious new owner to appear. They were expecting a corporate raider, a ruthless titan of industry who would liquidate their careers. The tension was so thick you could barely breathe. Roy, the Ansamite CEO, looked small in his chair, a man waiting for his own execution. He was about to be fired, and the irony was crushing. The doors to the boardroom swung open, and in walked Amy Reynolds. She wasn't dressed in her old assistant's attire, but in a simple, elegant, and powerful suit. She walked with a calm confidence that no one had ever seen from her before. The entire room stared, their minds unable to process what they were seeing. It was a plot twist so audacious, so impossible, that for a moment, they thought it was a dream. She didn't say a word. She walked directly to the head of the table seat, reserved for the chairman, the seat of ultimate power, and sat down. She placed her portfolio gently on the polished wood. Then, she lifted her eyes and looked directly at Roy Bowman. The silence was absolute. Roy's face was a mask of utter shock and disbelief. The woman he had humiliated and called worthless less than 24 hours ago was now sitting in his chair. In that single silent moment, the entire world shifted. All the rules of power, position, and worth were rewritten. Her presence at that table was the ultimate act of revenge, not a loud or angry one, but a quiet, definitive statement of victory. It was the culmination of her journey of overcoming, the final chapter in a story of quiet resilience. This was her redemption and his downfall. The look on Roy's face was a symphony of emotions: confusion, fear, dawning horror. He was looking at the new majority shareholder. He was looking at his new boss. He was looking at the woman he had deemed disposable, who now had the power to dispose of him. The surprise was so profound it left him breathless, a man completely undone by his own arrogance. Amy Reynolds cleared her throat, ready to begin the meeting. She had proven, without saying a single word, that true value is not determined by the title on your door, but by the character in your heart. Her destiny was not to be his assistant, but to be his successor. The quiet girl who was once a scapegoat had just become the queen, and the reign of the arrogant king was officially and irrevocably over. And so we leave Amy Reynolds at the head of the table, not just as a CEO, but as a symbol of a powerful truth that true worth is forged in kindness, resilience, and integrity, not bestowed by a title or a corner office. Her journey from being humiliated and deemed worthless to holding all the power is a testament to the quiet strength that so often goes unnoticed in our loud world. It's a reminder that destiny isn't just something that happens to us. It's something we earn through our character, one small, unseen act of goodness at a time. This story was an emotional roller coaster, from the depths of injustice to the peak of a truly satisfying redemption. If you felt that journey and believe in its message, please take a moment to hit that like button to show your support. It helps our channel more than you know. Now we'd love to hear from your heart. In the comments below, please share what part of this story impacted you the most. Was it the brutal firing scene? Amy's secret act of kindness for the janitor? Or that final powerful moment when she walked into the boardroom? Also, tell us if you expected this kind of ending, or if you were hoping for a different outcome. There are no wrong answers, and we genuinely love reading your perspectives. If you want to be part of more stories that touch the soul and challenge the way we see the world, make sure you follow our channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more journeys to share, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. In the meantime, feel free to explore our library of older videos. You might just find your next favorite story waiting for you there. Thank you for spending your time with us today.